And we're back. It's been about 45 minutes, and this is the second half of Christopher's How to Pour and Trim Models, the trimming half. So it's been about 45 minutes, so we're going to trim our model after making the impression, of course. Now, this, of course, isn't an actual impression, but in either case, some of the same issues can apply. If you can't separate it, since mine doesn't even have a real tab on it, if you can't separate it, or if it's overlapping like over here, you can use your buffalo knife in a few different ways to help you get that off. First of all, anything that's flowing over the edge of the impression, there's not a whole lot here, but some of you have had models where this stone is like all over and up all the way, it's sunk over it and makes a huge mess. You can cut that right off because you don't need that. It's on the outside of the vestibule. It's not something that you need. So you can even take your buffalo knife and just sink it right into that and then just chip it right off, and it'll come right off in a few different places. And now it's separate from the model. So you can do that. And then once you have that taken care of and there's no more overlap, or if it's just like a little bit, you can use the edge of your buffalo knife like a little wedge and just kind of set it in there and just kind of rock it back and forth. Again, more effective with the model, the metal trays. You just kind of ease it out all the way around as evenly as possible if you can. Once you get it out on one side, slowly work your way around to the other side. Try to do it as evenly as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of times impressions just come right out and that's not a problem. Whoop. And there we are. So that's the model. And as you can see, of course, it came out of this thing. So it's already kind of in the shape that we want, but let's just pretend it's not. Whoa, that looks terrible. Who poured that base, huh? We'll take that down on the model trimmer, and I'll show you a trick with that as well. So that we have it out, we're going to go over to the model trimmer. We're going to trim this baby. Which trimmer should we use? Do you have a new one? We'll use the new one. So this is a model trimmer at unit 6 and 7. One thing to do before you start is, if you can, these trays go up and down. Something that I've seen a lot of students struggle with is they'll go in and trim this one way and then flip it upside down and trim it the other way, and then everything's all uneven. And that's because this is not at a perfect 90-degree angle to the blade, because it adjusts. I think Jessica's is okay. It could probably come up a little bit. You can turn this just like any screw or wing nut or what have you. And this moves freely. You can take it out if you need to, but try and keep it in there. Someone will yell at us. So if you can, try and make it 90 degrees. If you can't, it's not a big deal. Just remember that when you're trimming a set of models and you put them together to even up your sides, make sure that if you start with like the mandible on the bottom and the maxilla on top, keep it that way for the whole time. Don't flip it upside down and try it that way. Once you start with an orientation, leave it that way. So obviously I can't talk and trim at the same time, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to do it, and then I'll show you when I'm done what it looks like. So this is the mandible. And I'm actually glad I poured this because I've noticed a lot of people are having a hard time with the rounding on the front. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this down. We're going to try and line up where this line of the vestibule is. This is nice and neat. I know everyone's doesn't look like this. But we're going to try and get it to about this point. Make it nice and even. We're going to round the interior of the front of the model here. Bring down the back. Clean up the bottom because that's a mess. And do our angles on the posteriors. And if I can, do we have a popsicle stick out? So this kind of already has a nice guide here. So if you're a popsicle stick person or not, there's popsicle sticks, there's lines on the tray of the model trimmer you can use as a guide as well. We want the canines, which are here. If you were to line them up at the rearmost tooth, you want that angle on the back to be about 90 degrees to this imaginary line. As you can see, it's not quite 90 degrees. Honestly, it doesn't have to be exactly 90 degrees, but the closer you can get to that point, the better. Can they see that okay? Yeah. Okay. Same thing on this side. So if you need to, pick up a popsicle stick, pick up a brush, whatever you have that's straight. You can use a piece of paper if you wanted to. Line up the canine with the rearmost tooth, drawing an imaginary line between them. So that one actually, oh, that's the premolar, there we go. And you want that back angle to be perpendicular to this imaginary line. Also, a good guide is you want the back of the posterior half of your model to be perpendicular to the midline. Again, it's not really there. You have to kind of imagine it or use a popsicle stick. Again, this is a pre-made impression, so this lines up pretty nicely. But a lot of times, students will have one side that's a lot wider than the other, and it usually is shaped like this. This side's way farther out, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute and how we can fix that. Same principle for the bottom. When you're trimming the bottom, make it parallel to the occlusal plane. A lot of